This is your report from both sides of the pond. Get it? Ducks, beavers, both sides of the pond? Okay, fine. I'll stick to dad jokes.
Well, we've still got a week until the first games of the year, but for now, I want to welcome in Max Torres, college football recruiting analyst and publisher for Ducks Digest. He's going to be back with us for another season as our Oregon correspondent for our Across the Pond segment. Max, we did a lot of interviews together when I was at KWVA, but now here I am at Fox Sports Eugene. Thanks for joining me today, and I'm excited that we get to work with each other once again.
Absolutely. Great to hear you again and be back talking with you, Justin. Thanks for thinking of me, and excited to talk some Ducks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. We always know you're good to talk some Ducks, but let's start off with a pretty general question. What are your overall expectations for Oregon as a team this season?
Sure. We could go a lot of different ways with that one,
Sure.
but I think I'll start with an explosive offense. Anytime you have a quarterback who's as experienced and as proven as Beau Nix is at this point, I think that the expectations are going to be pretty high. I think he's going to try to match and replicate, maybe even exceed what he did with the Ducks and Kenny Dillingham in 2022. And this is going to be one of the most talented offenses he's probably ever been a part of. The weapons that he has in the backfield, that wide receiver, a new look offensive line, revamped offensive line, and then hopping over to the defense. I think that's really where you have a high standard to meet, Justin, because that group definitely left quite a bit to be desired a season ago. And they went out into the transfer portal and got some really talented pieces. And they also brought in Dan Lane's first full recruiting cycle. So, his guys, right? So I think that with him and Tosh Lapoy and some of the other big names on this coaching staff, that defense is really one that needs to take quite a sizable jump if Oregon wants to get back to the Pac-12 title game, go to a New Year's Six Bowl, heck, even go to the playoff potentially. So there's a lot of things that have to go the right way, and I think that Portland State will be our first kind of barometer for a little bit about where this team's at, albeit not a true test. That won't really come until week 2 against Texas Tech.
Well, you're certainly previewing a lot of the questions that I wanted to ask you, but let's start off with Beau Nix and those bodacious billboards. What do you think about those billboards, and what do you expect from him in terms of the way the offense is going to look in Will Stein's offense this season?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the billboards. I think it's a really interesting thing to see, and just another example of Oregon's national brand. And I think Dan Lanning called it like a global brand or a global reach. So it's a really interesting and fun example of what Oregon's doing in the name, image, and likeness era of college athletics to promote probably its most iconic athlete right now, at least certainly on the football team. So I think that I like the Dallas one a little bit more than the Manhattan one. The Dallas one is that two-parter
Right.
that has him throwing the ball.
Yeah.
So I just like the strategy and like the two separate buildings aspect with that one. And then as far as Beau Nix and Will Stein's offense, I think we'll see a lot of what we saw last year under Kenny Dillingham, just playing to both strengths. Definitely got to utilize his legs, seeing that he's one of the most gifted runners when it comes to the quarterback position heading into the 2023 season. But I'm going to be curious to see where he can grow really as a true passer, because I think that's kind of where we need to see a little bit more growth from Nix. I really liked his decision-making last year, his ability to take care of the ball, take what the defense gives him. And we'll definitely see like plenty of play action, RPOs, stuff of that nature from Nix in 2023 would be my bet.
Yeah, certainly going to be interesting to watch that passing game. And speaking of the passing game, you already mentioned the weapons earlier. Where do you think those new guys like Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden, Gary Bryant Jr., some of the freshmen, where do you think they fit into the mix for Oregon this season?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a pretty heavy dose of all of those guys. You kind of have that concept of guys that come from the transfer portal. They don't come to their school that they choose unless they think they're going to have a pretty significant role in that offense. I think Tez Johnson obviously has a chemistry with Beau Nix from their days in high school ball out in Pinson, Alabama. So they already have a good connection, and I'm sure that Beau's happy to have a familiar face to throw to, in addition now to Troy Franklin, who he also already has a really good rapport with and chemistry with. So he's going to be an explosive, speedy guy for the Ducks. We got a little taste of that in the spring game. And then as for Gary Bryant, who comes over from USC, I think he's a guy who's kind of flying under the radar a little bit at that wide receiver spot for Oregon in fall camp. There's definitely been a lot of really positive buzz about Gary Bryant from the people that I've talked to around the program. So definitely expect a decent role for him in his first year with the Ducks after coming over from USC. And then Trayshawn Holding is a guy who can do a little bit of everything. Maybe wasn't crazy productive at Alabama, but you don't just take anybody at Alabama. So he's definitely a gifted receiver. Definitely going to be another big-bodied guy that I think Oregon can lean on and turn to in some big situations. And I'm going to expect to see him used in a couple of different ways, just with the variety and diversity of his skill set as a wideout.
So as it stands right now, before the season, aside from the receivers, what position group to you has the most question marks right now in terms of who actually plays and how much they see the field?
This is just a position group anywhere on the team.
Yeah, it could be offense, could be defense, whatever you think. Is maybe with that going into the season, we don't know exactly how much one guy's gonna be playing, another guy's gonna be playing, that kind of sort of thing.
Sure. I think for me, I would say the secondary, but that might be too broad of an answer. So maybe we hone in a little bit on safety. Because I really like the pieces that they added there with Evan Williams following in his brother Bennett's footsteps, coming over from Fresno State, and then you also have Tysheem Johnson, who comes in from Ole Miss. Evan Williams has been praised for his leadership abilities early on in his time with the Ducks and his hard-hitting nature in the secondary. And then you also have Tysheem, who is really, really versatile guy. Comes over from the SEC footprint. So I think he could be a guy that definitely has a solid impact because he's been playing all over the secondary. And then you also have Nico Reed, who comes over from Colorado. He's obviously familiar with Demetrius Martin, and he's been working a little bit at that star nickel role. But how do those guys kind of stack up against the pieces that Oregon's returning? Brian Addison, 6'5" safety, who was probably Oregon's most productive safety last year as we're looking at it. And then Steve Stevens is another veteran who's been there quite a bit. I'm just curious how the reps and the playing time get split up because I think there might be a little bit more of a gap between the returners and these transfer portal guys than we maybe thought at first. But certainly a position that they're overhauling, and I'm just curious to see what kind of combo they work with there. And then maybe if we see any of these younger guys get some run at corner.
Yeah, certainly a lot of guys that we could see in those spots. Just got a couple more questions here for you, Max. That's all we got time for, unfortunately. What do you see as the toughest games on Oregon's schedule this season?
Oh, yeah. Oregon's got a pretty tough schedule. I think certainly in the non-conference slate, it projects to be a lot more favorable for Oregon because they're not playing Georgia like they did last year, not playing BYU, a game that they handled pretty well. For me, I think I'm looking primarily at two games. I'm looking at that road trip on October 28th out to Salt Lake City to face the Utes. Not a lot of teams, Justin, can win out there at Bryce Eccles Stadium. And the Utes return a really good squad led by Cameron Rising. They're always defensively sound and really well coached by Kyle Whittingham. So Oregon was able to get one over on them last year in a defensive battle. Probably the defense's best game of the year, but that is never an easy game, and it comes I guess a little bit earlier in the year than we're used to. I think that's usually a November game, but that's one that I'm definitely going to have circled. And then how can we not talk about that USC game against Lincoln Riley, Caleb Williams, and the Trojans? They come up to Eugene for what a lot of people thought was going to be the last matchup potentially between these two teams for quite a while. But that rivalry is going to continue
It certainly will.
on the recruiting trail and on the field as they're both Big Ten bound. So that's going to be probably the biggest test of the year for Oregon's defense. But fortunately for them, it doesn't come until November, so they have a lot of time to figure things out. And they're going to face a lot of quarterbacks before Caleb Williams comes to Eugene. They're going to face Cam Rising, like I mentioned. They're going to face Michael Penix. They're going to face Shedeur Sanders and the former Duck Tyler Shuck in week 2. So I think that those are two of the games that I think are going to be the toughest for Oregon this year. I think USC's offense is incredible, but their defense is a bit more of a question mark right now, whereas I think we kind of know a bit more of what we have with Utah in that regard.
Yeah, certainly that USC game is going to be really fun, and it'll be a fun matchup going forward. It's certainly kind of an emerging rivalry that was already there, but it's getting even stronger now that both these teams are heading to the Big Ten. And like you mentioned, going to Utah, something that every Pac-12 team has wanted to avoid for years and years, and the Ducks are going to have to do that this season. Got one last question for you, Max. Heading into the season, what's the latest right now with Oregon recruiting?
Oh, man, yeah, Oregon's doing pretty well, I would say, on the recruiting trail. That's always the area that I like to really sink my teeth into. But for me, I think you got a couple of guys that you want to keep an eye on for Oregon here in the 2024 class. The Ducks currently have the number 12 ranked class in the country, according to 247. So 22 verbal commitments. I think that they have a majority of this class already kind of wrapped up. But now, as we get into the season, you're going to see them really focus their attention on those priority guys that are kind of playing a little bit of a long game with their recruitments. And then they're even looking into the 25 class a little bit now with some of these visitors coming into Eugene. But the latest on the 24 class, two big names, maybe three, that you really have to watch. You got Braden Platt, 2024 linebacker out of Yelm, Washington, All-American caliber player. He's set to announce his college commitment on September 4th. He's down to Oregon and Oklahoma. And I put my prediction in for Platt to commit to Oregon back in July. Still feeling really good about that pick as Dan Lanning does a great job recruiting the Pacific Northwest. Then you have another guy in Washington, 2024 Seattle, Washington, O'Day, running back Jason Brown Jr. He's down to a top 3 of Oregon, Michigan State, and Washington. And I'm really liking where Oregon stands for him. Might even put a prediction in for him pretty soon here, but he's kind of the main guy at running back for Carlos Lockman and company now that Nate Frazier has committed to Georgia. And then the last guy that we can talk about here, Justin, is 2024 Santa Ana, California, modern-day defensive lineman Aiden Breland. He's a 5-star recruit. I know Oregon fans love to talk about 5 stars. I talked to him last week following their win over Corona Centennial, and he's going to be chopping it down to a top 4, I believe. So he's taking a step in his recruitment, trying to get closer to that decision. I think Oregon has a better chance with him than a lot of people think, but he is a little bit hard to get a read on. Can't get too much out of him when it comes to interviews, but I expect Oregon to be battling schools like Georgia, Texas A&M, and Miami for that one. But that is really a huge target for Oregon here, still on the board in the 24 class, and certainly a guy they need, a difference maker for Dan Lanning and company along the defensive line.
Yeah, certainly targets that are going to be shared with some of these top schools, and it's going to be interesting to see with Oregon as they head to the Big Ten how things change on the recruiting trail. Max, that's all the time we have for now, but I'm excited to have you back on each week to talk some Oregon recruiting.
Definitely. Great to be back. Have fun with this first hit. So can't wait for the next one.